Okay, welcome everyone to the last IM training session we're doing. It's on troubleshooting. This should be a shorter session just to help you understand how we go about diagnosing problems that you might be having with your project and site and how to, if needed, report those to the developers so we can have them looked at and addressed. So we're gonna, first learn about how to go about troubleshooting or diagnosing problems that you're having. There are a lot of features with Zeit. The features interact with each other in lots of different ways, and this can sometimes make it difficult to understand why a certain behavior is happening. So we're going to go through kind of about some steps you can take to understand, what might be affecting a behavior you're seeing in your project that you don't like. We're also going to then think about how to diagnose and identify and address kind of those issues when you think you have them. And then last but not least, when we do have a bug, we're going to talk about just like reporting best practices, what to include in those reports, etc. So some short chapters today that we'll be covering, 5 quick chapters about these kind of common issues that we all have. The first we're going to talk about is what is a bug, which it sounds like it's kind of obvious to everyone that a bug is like a technical problem or a technical issue. But when we have technology like Zeit or other complex technologies, it's hard to say sometimes whether something is a bug, meaning like there is an underlying technical problem that is interfering or creating some sort of unexpected behavior or something not working, versus something just not happening as we want, and that being a result of settings, right? So a good example would be in Excel. Like if you don't type a formula into Excel, exactly correctly, it gives you an error. And that's not necessarily a bug. That means that something in that formula has not been set up correctly to run. And that it's sort of the onus is on you to understand the settings, how they interact, in order to get that formula to evaluate. So very similar to Site Manager, you have all these features, workflows, importing features, data view features, all of them combine to create a really complex information ecosystem that has rules that interact with one another. And it's really easy when we see something that's happening that we don't want to say, well, this is just a bug. But it's really much better to think about like, a bug is when there is actually an underlying issue with the platform and the code of the platform, or things related to that nature, as opposed to these settings are coming together in a way that I don't want them to come together, right? So a bug is not when something is just not working as we want, that could just be a settings issue, right? So when we try to identify bugs, the main questions that we really need to be asking are what features are affecting this behavior and how are they supposed to work? These two questions in combination will allow us to really answer whether something is a bug or not. So when a feature is not working as designed, as intended, then we can say it's a bug, right? Because if we say, we expect behavior A and that's not happening, then yeah, then something is clearly wrong. So I'm going to look at an example here. So a very common example is what happens when like a user is not seeing a site that they're supposed to work in the mobile app. And so, just to, illustrate this point, this could be due to a range of reasons. So I've mapped out kind of 4 or 5 reasons here. The first might just be their user role is incorrect. Maybe they don't have permission over that site or the region. And maybe it's just that their user role needs to be correctly assigned or corrected. Another could just be user error. This is really common that sometimes users say, I don't see it, it's not on my list, and it is indeed there. Maybe they need to search for it. Maybe they think it's under a different spelling or the site name has changed. This happens all the time, especially when we work in big projects with big data where things are changing a lot. Things change, not everyone is informed, and then it creates confusion, right? And that can create, the idea or impression that there's a bug when maybe there's just a mistake on someone's side. Site status, as we know, can prevent some sites from showing an app. It might be that this site was given a status that prevents it from showing in the mobile application. Everything is working as designed, but it may be the user doesn't know the status has changed, or maybe someone is just unaware that the site has that status. Another reason might be that the site maybe is newly created and maybe the user is expecting to see it, but they forgot to sync their mobile application, and as a result, it's not in their mobile phone list. So these are all like 4 reasons that have nothing to do with bugs, right? That actually everything is working as corrected, but could result in the user not seeing the site that they want to see or that they're looking for in their mobile application. The last reason this might occur is like actually there might be something wrong. Maybe everything is set up, applied correctly, but the user is still not seeing that site. And then in which case we might conclude that there is something technically wrong or something could be technically wrong. Another example might be like a workflow is not running. So again, going through the same sort of checklist, what might affect a workflow running or not running? The first would be the submission criteria. Are the criteria correct? So what is in the submission matching the workflow criteria that would cause it to trigger? Are there things like rather than having it trigger immediately, is it after some delay? And if it's after that delay, has the requisite time passed in order for the workflow to trigger? Another thing we might want to ask is this an old case? Was the workflow changed recently? If it was changed recently, maybe the workflow associated with the case and the workflow settings now are different, and maybe there was like a different logic applied when that case was submitted. Another one is what happens if the form was changed. So maybe we changed the form, and maybe the workflow criteria, they really care about site type. Like it runs on whether the site type is collective center or not. If the form was changed, if we remove that question, if we added options to that question, that may also change the behavior of the workflow. And again, these are all 4 reasons that are just related to the settings and features of Zeit that don't necessarily have anything to do with bugs or technical issues. These are all like, just settings related functionality that you might need to adjust as part of your project. And again, obviously the last is it could be a bug. It could indeed be something related to the platform or the server that is preventing the workflow from running. Okay, so what steps should we take? I mean, in some of this, the general advice is to rule out these kind of non-bug related causes before kind of making a bug report or concluding it's a bug report. This is for several reasons. If it's settings related, like investigating a bug will always take time. So if the reason is just because of settings, you're really delaying resolving the problem. And if you can identify that the problem is related to a particular setting and correct that, it means that the problem is going to get just fixed faster overall. So for example, if someone's reporting problems with like not seeing something or not having like the permissions to do something in Zeit, the first port of call should always be to check their user permissions. Are they correctly reapplied? If you want to like do kind of a reset of their permissions, like maybe there is some technical hang up, sometimes I will remove someone's permissions and just reapply them just to see if that has any impact. Maybe it resolves the issue, maybe it doesn't. Sometimes things just get like a bit stuck. If they're applied correctly, though, you shouldn't need to do anything. Another one is site status. This is a really common one that affects like a range of different functionality related to whether a user would see sites. If anything to do with the mobile app, another like first thing to do is sync the app. Just sync it. It doesn't hurt. It takes 5 minutes. It's just there to help us rule out potential causes for why we might be seeing a behavior. And the more we rule out, the more we can kind of conclude it's a bug more definitively. Okay, so in our second example, we talk about workflow problems. Again, if we have workflow problems, we might want to go through a similar set of behavior. We might want to check the submission itself, like what data is actually in the submission, and then compare that to the criteria of the workflow. We might ask ourselves, has the workflow changed recently? So we want to check the trigger, we want to check the related fields. If everything seems to be matching, then indeed the workflow should be running. Another way we can test workflows is always by just going into a test site and seeing whether if we make a new submission, we try and get, we want the workflow to trigger. So we enter everything as we think it should be entered. Sorry, we enter everything as we think it should be entered, and then we can see if the workflow runs on that new submission, right? And then lastly, we can also just ask ourselves if the form was changed. Okay, so the general process for addressing bugs is kind of a 4-step process, and I try to get everything starting with R to make it easy to remember. So the first, as we just discussed, is to rule out other issues. So we want to rule out things that affect this behavior that are related to settings or related to things in our control and our responsibility. Then if after ruling out, we still think something's a bug, we still think like, hey, I can't find anything that would cause this behavior to happen that is in my power, then we should make a report. And we're going to talk about reporting best practices later. These 2 steps are your responsibility. After that, the developer will go through kind of a 2-step thing. They will first try and replicate the issue. This is really important in just allowing us on the developer side to understand, hey, what's happening? Can we reproduce it? Because then it's more likely that we do indeed think it's a bug. Even if we can't replicate it, we will always like investigate it, but replication is usually a big part of trying to figure out like what is causing the bug. And we'll often ask for your help or advice on how to replicate the issue. So if you've been having a problem, we also want to know like how can we recreate that problem to study it better. The last step, response, is when we actually take steps to address or fix any bugs or issues. And how we do that really just depends on the nature of the bug and how serious it is and what it's affecting. Okay, so as I said in step 1, we've kind of done this with 2 examples. The first one is to rule out other causes. So we need to ask ourselves, what features or settings affect the issue we are having? We want to ask like how many things are affected. Are we able to identify a pattern or an extent? So like, is this happening? Is our workflow problem happening only with like cases in the last week? Is it a new issue? And then that allows us to really say like, hey, well, did I change anything on my side? Did I change my form? Did I change my workflow settings? Because then we're able to much more definitively say whether something could be a bug or not. Lastly, even though the developer is the one who's pretty much going to try and replicate the issue, are you able to reproduce the issue? So as I said, if you go into your test site, if you make a new test submission and try and get the workflow to trigger or not, are you able to do that? If you're not able to do that and you think everything is set correctly, yeah, it sounds like it might be a bug. Step 2 with reporting and verifications. This was not done, so I'm going to skip over this. We're going to cover reporting. So yeah, with reporting and verification, we're going to cover this later at the end of the presentation. With replication and response, as I said, this is really where we're asking ourselves, can we reproduce this problem so that we can study it? And we're also doing a little bit of a prioritization. So we treat more serious bugs that affect more users, more data, more projects as more serious. We also think about, is there a way the work, can you go about doing your work even with this bug present? So sometimes like a bug might only be affecting like a small amount of cases, and it doesn't prevent you from making new cases or doing new work, in which case we would conclude it's less serious. Last but not least, there's like a response and follow-up part of this where we have to go back and forth with you to determine what sort of corrective action might need to take place. Cool. Any questions? I'm going to pause briefly, but just kind of move on. Okay, moving on. Chapter 2. We're going to cover common problems related to troubleshooting. So these are areas where we most often see users struggling, like having problems, and also reporting things as bugs that may actually not be bugs. So the first kind of category of this is forms. Why are forms problematic? Most project data is going to be stored in your ODK forms. And then Zeit has a lot of complicated functionality built around form data, right? So that form data gets extracted in data views. It gets used to trigger workflows. It becomes like a big part of your own analytical pipeline, whatever work you're trying to do. So for all these reasons, like form behavior is quite complex because it's not even just about a form now, it's also about all these other features and functionality in Zeit, and it appears in many parts of the system. However, it's important to understand that like problems with your forms not behaving as you want them isn't really a bug to us. It is a problem in your form, and forms are your responsibility as the information manager to make sure they work correctly, to make sure they work as designed. It is very rare that we actually see any problems in ODK. So saying that, when your form isn't behaving as you want it to behave It's not really a bug. It means that there's something up with your form and you need to change the settings or the functionality of your form the way you want it. So yeah, again, same general process. First is to go through and think about your form in isolation to everything else. So if you're seeing something weird at the form level, the first thing is to check and to debug it yourself. So you don't even need to use Zeit for this. You can use the ODK XLS validator that you can find online. You can set up your own like Kobo test account. Many platforms use ODK forms, and you can use any of those platforms to kind of see the behavior of the form, really see how it's working and whether it's working as designed. If you're using calculated fields, which we strongly recommend, you can check these by changing the calculated fields temporarily to the note type. This allows you to see how all of your calculated fields are evaluating. So, are they showing the correct data? You don't even need to submit the data. You really just change it to note, see how the data is being processed in your calculated fields, see if that's the correct behavior that you want to have. For forms and data views, this is another big, I would say part of the problem. We're going to talk about data view and data pipeline issues in a bit, but generally speaking, if you see data in a data view that is coming in wrong, your first step should be checking the underlying form, the form submission and the submission data. Many times people are saying there's a problem with my data view, and actually the problem is just with the form itself. And it's important to keep in mind that when you change forms, your data views also probably need to change depending on what you're doing. So if you added a field, you need to add the field to the data view. If you remove a field, you might need to remove it from the data field, and so on and so forth. So yeah, just be aware of this. It's pretty common that we discover problems in forms when we interact with the data in some sort of external manner or through user interface. It's very rare that, well, sometimes we notice it in the form when we're filling out the form, but often we catch stuff later. Forms also affect workflows, and I think this is a tricky gotcha in the sense that many times users might have a workflow set up to work on a few fields in the form, and they're not aware that whenever you change your form, you need to be aware which of those fields are connected to workflows. Those fields need to be treated with a lot more caution, let's say. You need to be much more aware of when, let's say, those fields change or are going to be adjusted in any way, let's say. When you make changes to workflows or when you make changes to forms, you need to be aware of that versioning problem that we've discussed in previous lessons, where older forms will be stored in older or older data will have the older version of the form associated with them. They will also have older versions of workflows associated with them if you've changed workflows. So the behavior of your current settings is not necessarily the behavior that you would expect on those forms. When you do edit a form, it will bring it up to the latest version, which means it will kick out old versions, like old data. So if you removed a field, it would like drop that data. If you've added fields, those fields would show as blank. So, again, sometimes if you have a form bug and you correct that bug or correct it's not really a bug, but let's say a problem with your form, and you make a correction and then you hit edit, you can actually like address a lot of issues that you had in your forms just by using that approach. In general, as I said, we say like avoid changing your workflows a ton. It can be dangerous simply because it makes it very hard to understand how your form should and should not be behaving. So how do we do this? How do we avoid a workflow change? As I said, there's kind of different ways to set up your workflows. We covered that, I think, a lot in the workflow session. But just to come back to two general approaches to workflows, one is to use the workflow interface to select, answers to questions and things like that. And that works really well for static and simple forms. So if you have a form that's not going to change really that much, if the functionality is very simple, I would say the user interface we have for setting workflows works really well. However, option two, if you have a big form, if you have a form that has lots of complicated logic in it on when it should be open or closed or what sort of behavior it should have, oftentimes it's good just to tie your workflow to calculated fields. So rather than trying to select, let's say, all of the criteria or all of the options that will turn a form open or closed, a good way of doing that is just to have a field in the form itself that will evaluate to open and close, and then you tie the workflow to that. So this is good. This is a more durable solution because it means that you can change kind of every field except that one calculated field. Even that calculated field can change its logic. It's really only checking against what is evaluated in that calculated field. If you need advice on how to do this or guidance or to see the practical example of this, you can check the referral form in our IM training demo forms. Has a good example of this approach where the change status workflow is not tied to like the individual referrals. It's tied to a field called initial status or status initial, which just calculates whether or not, based on what's been selected, the form should be referred, meaning sent to open or sent to closed. Okay, so what adds complexity to a form? This is kind of important because generally speaking, bigger forms are going to have more problems, more challenges, potential issues. If we come back to that general best practice of data minimization, this is why you'll often see us in our reviews or advising you to try and keep forms as consolidated, as compact as it makes sense. Obviously, we don't want to do that at the sacrifice of data clarity or consistency. We still want the data we need, but we should kind of be generally aware of bloated large forms just because they can become really hard to manage over time. Again, whenever we make a lot of changes to forms at once, we're going to likely run the risk of having more problems with our data views, with our workflows. We're going to need to make larger changes throughout the pipeline. So yeah, sometimes I would say what I've seen is if you've been running or working with a form for 3-4 years and you have a big change planned, you're going to be changing 50% of the fields, 70% of the fields, even sometimes less, only 30%. It's sometimes just best to start with a new form. You can put up a new form called version 2.0. That's going to make things a lot clearer because you're going to be like basically dumping the old versions of the form. You're not dumping them, but like they're no longer associated with that new form, which is maybe just a new version of an old form. And it's just generally going to make your life a lot simpler because you don't have all of that sort of like historical versioning change that maybe happened over those 3-4 years. It also just is a little bit of a reset for what you're doing and for your caseload. And then you can always deal with like the backwards compatibility of the data through the data views feature. Yeah, and again, whenever you make a lot of changes or whenever you work with forms, just always test. Really, if you don't have one, set up an ODK test account somewhere, whether that's on Kobo, you can set up a free one, whether that's through Zeit, you can do that, or whether it's in just like the online Enketo form validator. No form should be deployed at scale, especially without like testing and review from your side and from your teammates' side. Any questions real quick? Awesome. So we're going to cover common problems this time, talking about data views. So yeah, data views are pretty critical. As I said, oftentimes problems with forms or other problems are only identified when we look at our data views. So in that, we have this question of, is it a problem with the data view or is it a problem with something else? Data views are also really critical in our work just for sharing, analysis, automations. When they go wrong, lots of things can break. I think we've seen, major problems with our platform in the past if the data view feature hasn't gone well. The good news is it's, I would say, pretty stable nowadays, and yeah, has been recently improved. The thing with data views though is, unlike your form stuff, they're not going to update dynamically. So data views are, as I said, they're sort of like a picture frame. When you change your form or when you change things in your project, you need to reset or update your picture frame. Data views can also be complicated just because they have a lot of settings. So you're selecting fields, and those fields are from different data sets within the platform. You're specifying filters on all sorts of different fields. You're renaming things, like any of that you might have done incorrectly, and that can cause problems. Additional problems can be caused because data views are like a bridge, right? So not only do you have to get everything right in the data view, but once you connect that data view to something else, that's yet another connection, yet another step in your chain that can cause problems. So in order to really understand our data views, it's good to think about our data pipeline. So I've made kind of 4 steps here In reality, there might be more than this. I think this is a reasonable number that we often work with. So step one is really about the data forms we use. So the ODK forms, as we talked about, that's where our data is stored. That's how our data is structured. And that has changed with updates. In part two of our data pipeline, we often have like case records. So actual submissions where data has been stored, where data has been entered. Generally speaking, that matches the structure, but it really depends on the data structure, right? Like text can have lots of different types of inputs. Integers based on the constraints could be different types of numbers, right? So like actually what ends up being stored generally will match the structure, but could be a range of different things depending on how you design those forms. In step three, we have the data view feature where we are working with that data in the data view and exporting it or getting it out of Zeit. And then in the last step, we have the other applications where we work in Zeit or where we work like with Zeit data. So that might be Power BI, that might be Excel, that could be any other analytical software you're using. So, you know, as I said, there's a whole chain all the way from the form structure to the submission to the data view to that external application. And there can be problems at any step of this process. So, you know, oftentimes we notice the problem at step three and we think, haha, the data view is the problem. But actually the problem can be located at any one of these four locations. It can be the form, it can be the submission, it could be the data view itself, and it could also be that external application where something is wrong. So generally speaking, the first step that I like to take is I always check that the data is coming in correctly. So I check the form, I check the submission. Is this looking correct? If those two steps look correct, that data then should be reflected in the data view. So is the data view then mapping? So kind of going from the beginning through your pipeline, chasing that data. So form correct, submission correct. Is it then showing in the data view correctly, right? Is the data not there? It might be filtered out, whether that's a date filter or another filter. Is the field missing? Because if so, then maybe it needs to be reselected or it hasn't been selected, or maybe it's been called something incorrectly. And then the last step you would want to check is your external application. You can go the other way. You can start by 4, 3, 2, 1. But generally speaking, go sequentially through each of these steps, check in each place. And generally speaking, that is a really quick and easy way to identify a problem. It's also good always just to pick like a sample case or a sample record. So if it's a site report, pick a site ID that has a problem, or a case report, pick a case ID, and then do that with that case ID. So check the form the case is associated with, check the case submission, check the data view where that case data is showing, and then, you know, do that in the external application. Cool. Just to be aware, again, we talked about this in our data view lesson, that we have metric fields in the data view builder. And oftentimes people expect a behavior from the metric fields that isn't necessarily supported. So as I said, we support these metric calculations. And it's sometimes good, like if you're not seeing something that looks correct, you might want to check the underlying data before proceeding. So what does that mean? That means that like if you are having a sum and that sum looks wrong in one of your site reports, you may want to then export your data through a case report and check that the sum is actually correct or not correct. As I said, there can be a really complicated behavior for some of these fields, especially things like last non-null value, even like sums, because as I said, maybe you're filtering something out and all of that can affect how that metric is evaluated. So you just want to, you know, like, as I said, if you're seeing something you think is off, check the underlying data and then try and understand, you know, what settings you have that might be affecting how that metric in your data view is processed. Cool. Another common problems that we see people struggling with in the data view feature is the API kind of functionality. So there's, you know, just general set of questions to ask when you're struggling with an API. One is like, when was the last report sync? Was it successful? Are you able to load your data to another application? So like, are you able to use that API? Is it loading correctly? So if you're struggling, for example, in Power BI, are you able to load it in Excel? Can you download the raw data from the platform and see, does that look correct? Because as I said many times, the problem may actually just be with this like application you're using. Maybe it's changed. We often use Excel and Power BI. I will say that they change things frequently, or more than I would like from my side. And that often does change a little bit how you need to configure your report. It's technically nothing is broken, but you might need to update your settings in not usually the data view. Usually it's in Power BI or Excel that we have to change something. Be aware of limits. As I said, the APIs start to fail at larger sizes. So that's at 20,000, 30,000 rows, or that's if you have many fields selected, it might be less. We also have sometimes problems with, yeah, just generally speaking, bigger data in more fields are going to cause more potential problems with your APIs. Okay, now we're going to talk about common problems that happen when we change our settings. So changes are like a necessary part of our operations. Changing things is often how we can improve things. But that said, changing frequently causes problems and challenges. Really, I think the correct approach to being an IM is not to be afraid of change, but to really have like the correct change mindset. So like having the right mindset when we make changes to our systems and our platforms, such that we don't cause problems, but also that we're not, afraid to make changes. So we're going to talk a little bit about this concept of technical debt. So what is technical debt? Technical debt is a term that exists in software development that really thinks about how quickly we can change something, like how quickly are we able to make changes, to build new features, to do new things, versus the complexity of the systems we manage. More complex systems mean that oftentimes, in order to make a change, we need to plan more thoroughly. We need to think through our decisions a lot more in advance in order to avoid causing problems. This is especially true when you have like long running projects. So if you run a project for 4 years and you have data associated with a bunch of forms, you'll know from experience that it's a lot harder to make a change without, potentially causing issues or potentially like breaking some of your dashboards or causing issues with the reporting that you need to do. And this is, broadly what we can think of as technical debt. And technical debt, as I said, is not great, but it's just like a part of life. And it's needs to become kind of a part of how you think about managing your work. And part of this is really that, if you have messy forms with like data that hasn't been properly constrained and like you have issues with those forms and issues for a long time and they've been unaddressed, you have more technical debt. It is going to be harder to make changes in the future just because you're going to need to do like cleanup, and it's just going to be harder to understand all those complex interactions that might be taking place in your data and in your project. So generally speaking, I think the best approach you can have is to really think about changing your mindset towards change. I see that many information managers are afraid to make changes, resistance to change when their managers or their teams are suggesting something. And I would really say that please don't be afraid of change. Zeit is designed with change in mind. So it is designed as a humanitarian tool. It is designed as a place for you to make continuous improvements to your operation. We want you to get feedback from your teams and implement that feedback in the project to make things more efficient, to make things better quality. Also, just to be aware that not changing things can also cause problems. So sometimes like people are resistant to changing something, and that might delay a fix, that might delay them from making improvements. But that also comes at a cost, right? Usually improvements are things that will save us time or make things more accurate. And those improvements come with tangible benefits. So not making a change can also cause problems, right? Can lead to weird data records, can lead to inaccuracies and inefficiencies that also add up over time, right? Generally speaking, also, if you're working in a humanitarian response, you just have to be comfortable with change. You have to get in the habit of not shying away from this. Okay, but with our change mindset, what does that mean we should do? So my general advice, to have a healthy change mindset is to do three things. One is to understand the features you're working with. So if you're going to change something, what are you changing? How does that thing work? What is associated? Like what is connected to that? Once you understand what's connected to it, you'll understand what this will impact, right? So if we're going to change a data view, we'll think about, hey, what is connected to that particular data view? Is it a dashboard? Is it an Excel file? Who is using that? What will need to happen if I make a change here, to all the places later on in that pipeline, that might be, impacted. And the last one is always like, Oftentimes, it's generally advised, if possible, just to back things up. So this could be backing up old data. This could be making sure you have the old version of the form. This could be like duplicating a data view, and rather than like changing a data view, making a new one, making changes there first, reconnecting things there first before you sunset the old view. Some of this is possible or not possible depending on what changes you're doing. But generally speaking, if possible, it's a good thing to do. Another thing you can do, as I said, is generally just take like a four-step process to any change you want to make, especially if you're managing large volumes of data, if you're managing like bigger projects that have been running for a long time. The first step is always to plan your changes. So plan out what you want to do. Like if you've worked with me and Candace globally, you know that Candace and I always ask, as part of our work with you, that you make a bullet pointed list. What are the things you're trying to change? List them out, and that's the first step in understanding like what's going to be affected, what are those things connected to. Another thing is just to try and group changes together. So don't make a change every week. That is really going to be more work for you. It's going to be more work for your teams. You want to create stability where stability can be created. So if you have 4 changes to make, maybe 2 changes are ready this week, 2 changes will be ready next week. Just wait. Like if you can wait, it's always better to make 4 changes in one go. It's going to mean it's easier for you to test. It's going to mean your team can have 1 day of review. So, right, if I make 4 changes today, I can tell my team members tomorrow, hey, I made some changes. Please check. Tell me if anything looks wrong. Tell me if anything's incorrect. If you're making changes every week, it's really hard for people to like always be reviewing, always be checking things. Cool. Any questions on that? Awesome. I think we're going to move on to the last section. So the last section is really about reporting problems and what happens when bug happens. So bugs are part of development. Zeit and Zeit Manager are developing platforms. We are expanding features. We're trying to make things better for you. Generally speaking, we think the improvements we make are worth the headache of the bugs they cause. As I say, we have like a change mindset in Zeit. But unfortunately, because everything is interconnected, your projects are very long running, bugs are just like gonna happen, and we really rely on your reports to address them. So if you think you have a bug, please report. We'd always rather you report a potential bug than not report. That said, we do need accurate information to address problems. Like it is not enough to just tell us like I have a problem with my project. We really need like more details. And I know that making reports about bugs is the least exciting thing you could do. I promise everyone on the call that I have made more bug reports than anyone else. And I probably have found more bugs than anyone else. So know that we do want your reports. We want them to be accurate and clear. And generally speaking, like we will respond in a proportionate manner. So if you're having a bigger problem, we try and respond more quickly. We reprioritize everything around fixing that bug. But we are a small team. We're a small team globally, but the developer also does not have a dedicated bug team. The same team that is doing all the general work is also doing all the bug work as well. Cool. So we're going to look at 2 scenarios of bug reporting. In the first one, a user comes to us and says, I have a problem with data not showing in my report. Great. We'll report in data. Report 123, it is the data about the user's organization. I see the data in the field related to the organization. Correct, but I edited this username, Ma Jones, profile, and it's still not showing in the report. Okay, we will investigate. So this is just showing like one potential conversation that we have had about a bug. And this is a real conversation that I had recently about a bug report. And this is scenario 2. I have a problem with the organization field not showing data correctly in report 123. After I edited the information related to the username Ma Jones, in their profile, it shows IOM, but in the report, it is not showing any value. Okay, we have verified the problem and will respond. Scenario 2 is much better for us. It is much better for you. As I said, if we don't have enough information to replicate the problem, to even investigate the problem, we're just going to ask you for more information because we can't hunt around for like a needle in a haystack. We need you to help us direct our energy and our efforts to like, what are you looking at? Where are you seeing this? I think it's very clear to you in your mind, but it's not clear to us whether you're looking at like a data export, whether you're looking at the user interface, where you're looking in the user interface, given that there's like different locations where different information, the same information will appear in Zeit. So like, what page are you on? what report are you engaging with? Like all of this information is really critical. And we have kind of generally like taken the practice that we will not begin an investigation unless we have enough information to investigate. So yeah, in scenario two, especially when you have critical problems, especially when you have big issues, the more precise you can be, the more information you can give us, you're going to get a much faster response. So what to include? Always include whatever primary keys you're working with. So if you have a problem with a site, include the site ID. If it's a problem with a contact, include a contact ID. Even if it is like every contact in your project, you can say, this is affecting all my contacts. Here's an example. I'm gonna give you one example or two examples or five examples, as many as you can give us in an easy way. And that really helps. That really helps us understand. So as I said, there's no like one primary key that you always need to give us. It depends on what you're reporting about. But if you have user issues, username, form case issues, case IDs, report IDs for data view feature, or we call them data view IDs, I guess now, and so forth and so on. Okay, other information that is helpful to us. One is just scope. Like, how much is this affecting? Is this like, have you only seen this with these 3 cases? Is this every case that has come in the last week? Is it all the cases since the beginning of time? Like this is just helpful in also allowing us to prioritize, but it means if you say it's everything, that we should be able to find it pretty easily. If it's only a few things, it's going to be harder for us to find, and we're going to need your help. Troubleshooting, like what have you done to diagnose the issue? Like what have you ruled out? Like it's really helpful if you like tell us, I haven't changed my form, I haven't changed my workflow settings, and now it's not working anymore. Like that allows us to narrow in on what the cause could be. Context, like what else has happened, right? Like if you've made changes recently, please tell us. Oftentimes we can help you like investigate. Maybe you did everything right, but maybe when you uploaded the form or when you made the change to the workflow, maybe something technically happened behind the scenes that would be good for us to know about. Last but not least, attachments. Second. Mute someone. Yeah, there we go. Go back to the right slide. Cool. Last but not least, what goes in a report? So where was I? Last but not least, attachment screenshots about app page. So generally speaking, if you can include attachments, it's nice. So like if you're working with a data view, like include an export and like highlight the rows that are affecting you. If you have some issue with the user interface not showing correctly or something going wrong, take a screenshot. If it's in the mobile app, the reason I wrote the About App page is that in the About App section of the mobile application, it actually shows you what version of the application you're working with, what OS you're on. That's really useful, especially with the mobile app stuff, because a lot of the phones are older and they maybe have like different behavior, or like older OSs that might just be like running the software differently. So this is why that also can be helpful to include. So as I said, no like one solution in terms of like always include this attachment, but just like generally think like what would it be helpful for us to see to try and understand the problem you're having. Cool. So how do you report? Like, what is the actual process? I think many of you know there's a link on our website called Support Portal. You click there. There's like a really short form. Anyone can fill out a report. So even if the IM is not around, anyone can do it. Generally speaking, we will liaise with the IM or the project manager of a project before like like if it's a straight up bug, we will address it. If it needs some back and forth, or if there's like some corrective action we need to take, we will probably seek authorization from that information manager or project manager. Generally, like we start investigating as soon as we can. It goes straight to the developer, so it doesn't get reviewed by me at first. But as I said, the developer may ask for information if they don't have enough to actually begin trying to replicate or verify the issue. Yeah, last but not least, we do like things like prioritization. We set a time frame for how quickly we're going to be able to respond. Less urgent stuff, generally speaking, may take up to 2 weeks. But low priority issues are really issues that affect a very limited number of cases, and generally speaking, do not prevent someone from doing their job. If we go up to the immediate time frame, we're trying to respond within a week. Urgent issues, we try and respond within, as soon as possible. We're basically, if we have an urgent issue, it means we're not doing anything else until that issue is resolved. Yeah, please pay attention to emails back from the platform. So you'll receive sometimes emails saying, hey, we've received your bug report. Here's our response, or here's a request for further information or a question from you. If you don't respond to that, generally speaking, it might hold up the investigation, especially if we need it to continue. Common problems we have in our bug pipeline. One is that user doesn't respond. We see this a lot. Like if you open a bug report and we ask questions, if we don't receive a response from you, we're going to close out in 2 weeks, meaning we give you 2 weeks to respond. But if we don't hear back, we kind of assume that we're not going to hear from you. The other is that oftentimes, like, okay, we found the issue, we are correcting it, but we need like some information from you. Like maybe, do you want us to do X or Y? Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. But generally speaking, like, yeah, you need to respond to that because we're seeking authorization to take some action. And then the last step that sometimes we need your engagement on is generally where I might be involved. Like if we need to do some cleanup. So like a problem has been caused by a bug, not by any fault of your own, and we need to clean this up. We need to edit some data, or we need to like put things back how we want them. Generally, yeah, I might be involved in discussing what we want to do when it comes to that particular issue. Doesn't happen too often, but has happened. So just be around, available to discuss these steps with us when we need. Additional requests. So this is not bug related. It's just to let you know that sometimes some of you guys have things that you want to do that the developer, in addition to managing bugs, also helps us with. So these features are not available on the front end user interface, means that you cannot do these things on your own. Some of this is intentional. So bulk deletions, like if you want to delete 300 sites in one go, you can't do that. We don't want users to be able to do that. The risks for causing problems or issues is pretty great. You can delete things individually, but we don't want you, accidentally deleting 200 sites. So if you do want to delete something in bulk, you can literally just send a list of what you want deleted. You need to be the authorized person. I will sign off on those requests before they happen, just to say that, yes, you are the authorized person. And that's how, if you want to delete, 30 sites and you don't want to click every site and click delete, then you can just send the site IDs. If you want to delete case IDs, you can send a list of case IDs. Pretty straightforward. Same for like bulk user info changes. Like if you wanted to change all of your users, like let's say you added the field organization, but you have 100 users and you don't want to like manually edit the profile. That's something we can do. Another one is changing site IDs in bulk. So this is a tricky process because the way our function works is it works off site ID. So you can't change site ID in bulk, but the developers can. So if you send a mapping, meaning the old site ID and the new site ID you want it to map to, they can do that for you. And then last but not least, moving cases. So if you have a bunch of cases that you want to move to a particular site, this is also something that they can help you with. Sometimes it's useful if users have submitted cases in the wrong location. Cool. I believe that concludes our training series. So hopefully that helps you. I will answer any questions now that you guys have.